Hello, and welcome to my leadership series. I'm Elizabeth Suarez, a leadership and negotiation strategist who works with organizations, executives, and professionals to enhance leadership, negotiation, and conflict resolution skills, resulting in a more profitable, inclusive, and productive workplace. In today's video, I'm spotlighting Mike Stevenson, the founder and director of Scotland-based Thinktastic, a motivational communication agency which serves organizations to imagine it, shape it, build it, and scale it. With that, I want to welcome Mike, and I want to thank him for being here.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I'm absolutely delighted with this transatlantic conversation.
Perfect. So let's go ahead and get started and let's get to know you a little bit. So I have a couple questions to ask you about your background. The first one is where were you raised and where did you go to school and what did you study?
Well, my education was curtailed at quite a young age, and I left at 15. But before that, I'd been, my very first education was in Pakistan because my dad had a job over there for 3 years. So I went to kindergarten in Pakistan, came back to Scotland, and I had 3 different primary schools or infant schools. And so by the time I reached secondary school or high school, I'd been pretty damaged by the whole experience. I hated it. I hated sitting in a classroom. So I was expelled from school at the age of 15.
Wow.
So, yes. And, all kinds of things happened after that, which have actually formed who I am and, my views in the world. But I did go back to education later on, did a kind of catch up when I was 23 and got, the very basic exams that I've missed out on. Then I went to do a communications studies course when I was 32. Then I did an MBA when I was well into my 40s.
Wow, so that's impressive. I love this trajectory. What's interesting is that you didn't stop studying. You kept on educating yourself. So good for you, Mike. Totally. So what was your first full-time job?
I have to go back to 1965, which gives you a sense of how old I am. But bear in mind, I was 15 then. And my first full-time job was working in a tailor's shop. And it was, I had a functional job. But here's a good example of leadership. We had a few of my girlfriends used to stand outside the shop, and I would go out and chat to them if I could. And the boss said to me, this is 1965, he said, why don't you invite them in and we can take them upstairs? And I said, absolutely not. And I was sacked for insubordination. So that was my first full-time job. I think I was getting £3.15 a week. And thereafter I think I had 29 jobs before I was 27 years old.
Wow, this is quite interesting, your trajectory. So with this, because you do have a very unusual trajectory from other leaders that I have interviewed. So I am now curious to know, based on your experience and based on all your background, tell me how you will define leadership. Like in a couple of sentences, how would you define leadership?
I think it's the ability to sell a vision, to give people a sense of what it looks like, what it feels like, what it tastes like, to inspire them, and then to empower them to go make things happen. It's not about power, it's about positive influence, and it's about, actually the best definition of leadership I've heard is a leader creates other leaders, not followers.
I love that. So with that definition, a leader creates other leaders. What are the core principles that guide you as a leader in order to be able to do that?
Well, I've made lots of mistakes. So I can say that I have failed, at different times in my life. But I would say now, absolutely. First of all, you've got to be clear about where you're going. really clear. And, people have to see it, they have to taste it, they have to, get a real feeling for it. But then you've got to make everyone feel valued and significant. That's the first thing.
Okay.
And then you've got to believe that they are the people that will make things happen, and to remove all the blocks, to give them the wings and to give them the confidence. It's not about assigning tasks. It's about assigning, a responsibility and allowing people to get on with it, and, helping them by training. And it's about listening to people.
Okay. I love that. That is excellent. I think that is wonderful. So now with this idea of being the leader, how you're saying it, assigning, the leadership, empowering them and not assigning tasks, letting them move forward and guiding them. With today, the mandate or the world is all about inclusive leadership. I mean, a lot has happened in 2020. 2020 was a year of a lot of transformation for the entire world. And now with 2021, the same thing. It seems that that transformation is going to basically generate other transformations as well. So if it's all about inclusive leadership within organizations, what's your opinion on the subject of inclusion in the workplace and specifically in leadership?
Well, I think, I've worked in lots of organizations. I've had some terrible leaders.
Mhm.
And the first one that really, got me and got me involved, I arrived in a building site in London. And I suppose I was about 21 then. And, I was welcomed by this foreman.
Mhm.
And he was a Welshman, and he put his arm around me and he says, "Michael, welcome." And I'd never been welcomed into a workplace before.
Okay.
But then he showed me the drawings and he said, "This is the palace you're building." And I suddenly felt this surge of energy because no one had ever told me what the big picture was. And you would have thought there was a hierarchy because I was just a labourer. But
Okay.
no, there wasn't. Because he said every day, if any one of you, drops out, we lose something huge. There's a big hole here. So he made me feel I was important. He made me feel that I had a significant role and that I was contributing to this palace. In fact, it wasn't a palace, it was a pub, but or a public house, a bar. But that was the first example to me of inclusive leadership. Now, that was all men. But we had people from different parts of the country, from the West Indies. It was the early sort of immigration in Britain. But since then, we've got the richness of diversity now. We've got more women taking up leadership positions. By the way, I think it's one of the best things that's happened in recent years. And Scotland's doing well on that. We've got a lead, a first minister who's a leader, and there's a lot of women in the cabinet now, which is great. But you have to recognize that everyone has ideas, everyone has talents, everyone has experiences that they can bring. So it's recognizing there's no hierarchy in common sense, in ideas. So it's really saying each and every one of you is important. And I see each and every one of you. There is no hierarchy of value, but it's making people believe that. It's not, there's no point in saying it. You say, we are a diverse organization. It doesn't mean anything. You have to live that. You have to demonstrate it every day. And I always say, the best leaders know people's names, and they will spend a bit of time, every day, if they're in a space where they can do that, just saying, "How are you? What are your challenges today? How can I help you?" It's really about, creating an atmosphere where everyone is important and knows they're important.
Okay, yeah, and I really understand that concept, because I remember when I got into the corporate world, they will talk about the flattening of the hierarchy. There was no hierarchy, but Mike, like you said, it was a lot of talk, and it wasn't action. To tell you the truth, I mean, flattening of the hierarchy was like I don't see any flattening of the hierarchy. So with that, in your opinion, what is the biggest challenge a leader like yourself faces in leading diverse organizations?
Well, today, I think it is giving people hope. I think that's really important. You've got to be enthusiastic, you've got to be authentic, and you've got to give people a sense. I mean, I've got this talk that I give, and it really does stir people up, and it's entitled "The Best Is Yet to Come."
Okay.
So that's important, and I think you have to keep giving people this sense that the world is going to change because we're going to change it. We are not victims of environmental factors, of forces outside. We are shapers, and you are shapers. And I think that's the first principle. The other one is that you can get into habits very easily, and I think lots of organizations have habits that form in the culture. So you've got to create a culture where there is this constant stream of ideas. And we've seen in the last year, we're having to change. We're having to change everything we do. Now, do we see it as a deficit between what we used to have and what we have now? No. You try and make the most of it and say, actually, we can do things better this way. Otherwise, people feel that they've lost something. And I think keeping this momentum, this belief, this energy and enthusiasm going is the primary responsibility just now for me. And that's what I do, because it is very easy for people to get quite depressed by the environment we're in. They watch the news, and anyone who watched the news today over the last year, you'd want to go and get antidepressants and fill your mouth with them straight away. But you can't live like that, because actually now there are more opportunities than there have been for a very long time. That's what periods like this do. They might lose something, but they create more opportunities. And I see more opportunities now than I have for a number of years. And that's the upside of the downside.
Exactly. Yeah. I like how you said that aspect of hope and also the aspect of enthusiasm. And the third one that I took from you, which I started implementing it when 2020, the pandemic was happening, I stopped watching the news, Mike, because I realized that I was like, I am depressed the entire time. And it wasn't depressed because the pandemic was happening. It was depressed because I had no hope. So it's the same thing. So during this ongoing pandemic that we all have lived and we continue to live, leaders have to, virtually reinvent themselves with everything. So what were some of the actions you took with your company in order to keep it going, in order to still be here? What did you do?
Well, I mean, what I do a lot of generally is to go out and give talks to big corporations, to public services. So effectively, I'm a motivationalist. So I go out and I speak, but I can't go anywhere and speak now because there's no audiences. So, first step was to say, right, rather than moaning about there being no audiences, how could I transfer this into other mechanisms? So I obviously went to Zoom. I went and did acting classes. I did online acting classes so that my online presence could be, reasonable. And this is important because I like standing. I like walking about a stage, and I get lots of energy, and I create energy with that. So how do I take that and sit down in front of a screen and translate that into something that's as energetic and my enthusiasm shows through? So that was the first thing. But then I saw that there was an opportunity for a program so when I'm selling to companies, I can say, look, I can give one talk. That's fine. I can do one talk. But, what we need now is, to work with people, to work with them over, a series of big steps so that, you cover, first of all, the best is yet to come. You try and engender a sense of purpose, because people might say, we've got a vision, but they can't actually translate that into a purpose that they own. So I think that's important to do. Then I also talk about collaboration, and I talk about creativity, because the greatest attribute that human beings have, and the only thing that distinguishes us from the animal kingdom, is our imagination. And organizations can lose their imagination because everything becomes like a sort of fixed track. This is the way we do things. So I'm quite a disruptive person, and organizations now will welcome disruption in a way that they didn't before, because we all have to reshape, rethink, reconstruct, reimagine. So I've found myself with an in there, and actually it's doing quite well. So those are the big things I had to do. And also, I think in terms of my own, self, how do I keep energizing myself? How do I keep getting enthusiastic? Well, I do a number of exercises. I play the guitar, I sing sometimes. Sometimes you'll hear me in the morning, singing at the top of my voice. I think my neighbors think I'm mad, but actually I'm just, cheering myself up. And I read a lot. I do not read leadership or management books just now. I read fiction.
That is fascinating. Do you know that you're one of the few people in leadership that has told me that? Why don't you read management or leadership books? I'm just curious.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I've learned a lot about leadership by just being in employment. I've been led, but I haven't been led, in all honesty, because we don't have enough good leaders. I'm talking about politics as well as business and public service and all those things that we depend on. And the person you meet on the front line, which is often the only point of contact with an organization, you can tell if they've got a great leader, because that is your first encounter with the company, the business. And if they don't have a good leader, it is reflected in the way that you're dealt with.
Okay.
Right? That's how important it is. So I've learned, sorry, frog in my throat. But the reason I don't read a lot is I like to use my experience and the things that I see to guide what I say.
Okay.
Because I could so easily, translate it into a theoretical framework.
Mm-hmm.
But I think great leaders, come from the most inobvious backgrounds. So they need not be academic in any way whatsoever. In fact, the best leaders I've met don't have an academic background. Mm. So that's one of the reasons that I don't want to get into, for me and what I do, I don't want to get into management speak, because that's what happens when you read all the time. And I think the other thing that happens is the organization then starts using a language which is alien to most of the people that work in the organization. Excellent. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I like to talk about leadership from my own experience and the stories. I've got lots of stories, by the way, about good leadership.
So let me ask you, because so we don't have that much time left. I want to look at this post-pandemic world that hopefully we are getting into eventually and continuing going through. What do you see as some key opportunities that lie ahead for businesses?
Well, I mean, I think there are probably more spaces opening up than there have been for the last 30 years.
Oh, okay.
Not just in terms of technology, because we always talk about innovation. When you use the word innovation, you always think of technology, you think of digitalization, and that's going to play a huge part, a huge part. But I think there are more fundamental shifts are going to happen, I think, around education. I think that we're going to go through a period of learning revolution, where people are on a journey of continuous learning. I know about this because I've been on one. Okay. And that's going to redefine the whole notion of career, because in countries like Denmark, it is not assumed that you go into a career. So yes, so people might have 3, 4, 5 careers. And young people coming out of university now, the first thing we've got to recognize is that they do not want to work for a company that's damaging the planet. They don't want to work for a company that's not doing well by its people or is damaging its local community. So the first opportunity is to say, if you're in business, you've got to do well by doing good.
Okay.
That's just the way the consumers are changing their buying habits. It's a revolution, and it's going to be an acceleration. And I think lockdown and the pandemic has really accelerated this. People have had time to think. We've seen wildlife in our cities that we didn't see before. We've smelt, fresh air. And I think that there are huge opportunities, not just through digitalization, but also reimagining the world. And, if you can, align your company and, capture the imagination of the emerging generation, you're doing really well. But also recognize that, people are looking for different careers. So you might have to be really quite, imaginative in how you retain the best people.
I love that. I love the reimagination and also the taking care of the environment. That's a key thing in the digital world. Nobody has ever told me the fact that this lockdown or the constraints that we're having, that we can't do what we used to do before in February 2020, that all of a sudden now we have more time to think or more time to consider what's out there. So we have looked at opportunities, and I'm glad to see that you're looking at it from a positive perspective. But conversely, what are some concerns that you have observed that we need to pay attention to be effective leaders now with this post-pandemic world that we're living?
Well, I think the first one is all the things I've mentioned about, you have to raise people's spirits, you have to give them a sense of where you're going, you have to see opportunities and involve them. You do not involve our people enough. And I even go outside, I talk to children, legally. I bring children, and children have got the most extraordinary imaginations, and not enough businesses involve children in that kind of future imagineering, and the second thing is to recognize that your employees are living in a different world now. And you have to put high value on them. You have to think about the impact of all this on them, because you want your people to come into work with a strong sense of purpose and a spring in their step. And we've got an explosion of mental health problems just now. So organizations, actually countries, putting well-being at the forefront of the way they approach their business, their place in the world, is important. And I think the other is never to describe yourself as a particular kind of company. I think we need to be more fluid now. You've seen companies that produce clothing in normal times producing PPE. It's that adaptability. And I think if we're going to be adaptable, and I think we do have to be, then we have to train ourselves to do that. And that means, constantly asking people, for their ideas, looking outside, having an intelligence system that involves all your people. We used to have research and development. We don't now, because everyone here is an innovator. Everyone here is looking out there and seeing opportunities for us. And if you include your people in identifying those opportunities, then you've done something quite extraordinary. I think the other thing to think about in terms of future trends is, people have been very lonely. And we have to think about how we can address the loneliness of our customers, our clients, and our staff, because it is a horrible, crippling, feeling that you're isolated from the rest of the world. So we have to redefine the offices as well. I don't think offices will exist like they do just now, but I think they could become, culture hubs, places where people go rather than to sit behind the desk, but to actually meet and generate ideas and exchange and bring in people from the outside to, contribute to the growth and the energy and the opportunities this company has got, ahead of them. I think it's exciting.
I like how you are putting everything together, that there is hope and there is excitement and amazing opportunity in the future, even though, the majority of the people look at 2020 as the
I know.
year that really ruined everything. And instead, what I like is your inspiration of it did not ruin anything. It actually made us reinvent and rethink how we do it. So it goes back actually into what you talk about and how you work with organizations, the imagine it, the shape it, the build it, and scale it. When I read that, I was very caught by those words because that's what it is. So as I
Yeah.
conclude this interview, I have one more question for you. And this is based on your background and how you shared with me how you had an interesting starting of your life as a career person, especially at 15 when you had your first job and everything. What is one key advice you will give a younger Mike Stevenson? What would be the one key advice you will give Mike Stevenson if you met a Mike Stevenson, a young 15 to 18-year-old or 20-year-old Mike Stevenson?
Yeah. Well, I before I answer that, I just want to very quickly say I slept out in the streets for a year because things went wrong in my teens. So what I can say to all young people is, adversity can be a very powerful driver forward. So when you fall forward. And if I was to say it to myself, if I was to advise myself, I would say, you could achieve things a lot faster than you think you can. Because sometimes it's taken me a while to develop the tools, the nerve, the audacity to go and do something, which I simply could have done, much faster. I'm now 70, so I can look back, on, what's that, 54 years?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I can say it with some authority, you can do, so much more than you ever imagine you can. And life is about, stretching yourself. It's about realizing that your capacity for growth is almost unlimited. And I'm still telling myself that. And I'm excited about the future, and I'm 70.
Wow, that is very inspirational. So with that, I appreciate how you said let's fall forward, let's actually go faster, and let's inspire ourselves and not, limit ourselves. So Mike, I want to thank you for the time that you took to do this interview with me. I also want to thank everybody that is watching the interview and welcome any feedback on this topic. Comment below to continue the conversation. In the meantime, I will see you next time. Nos vemos.